Hello.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jed Stone, and I have the great honor and privilege of introducing Jasmine Williams, the new executive director of the Ant Mound Foundation. Jasmine comes to us as a committed person struggling to bring social justice to our community. I'm told she's a tireless worker, she's a bright and powerful woman, and we welcome her. Jasmine, lead us for tonight and take care of Ant Mound for us, would you?
Thank you so much, Jed. As Jed said, my name is Jasmine Williams. I am the new executive director for Ant Mound Foundation. I am also the founder of For One Foundation that was started earlier this summer as an answer to what has been happening in our community with police brutality. So it is my absolute pleasure to be on board with Ant Mound and be able to partner with Anthony and the board to really make change in the community. And I'm extremely excited to be able to host this panel tonight, to be able to get to the bottom of some really pressing issues that we have in going on basically in the country right now. So I will go ahead and introduce everyone. We have Philippe Millen. Please forgive me if I am messing up that last name. He is the former chief of staff for Congressman Dobbs. We have Larnell Farmer. He is the prior Waukegan Police Department detective. We have Alyssa Rivera standing in for Joey. He is the sorry. I'm hearing an echo for Congressman Dobbs. We have there we go. You guys hear me clearly now? Okay. We have Rita Mayfield. She's a state representative who's amazing. I've worked with her quite a lot this past summer, trying to get some stuff taken care of. We have Juan Rivera. He was wrongfully convicted and exonerated. We also have Anthony McIntyre. He is the president of Ant Mound Foundation. And we have Mr. Eugene on as well. Am I missing anyone? I feel like we're still missing Zaki, but I'm sure he'll hop on at a later date. I will go ahead and play the first video. So just so you guys know how this goes or how this is going to go tonight, we have, Ms. Muir and Eric Reinhardt, who were unable to join live tonight, but we did send them some bullet points for them to speak on and give their piece in regards to drawing a blank. We sent them videos to talking about criminal reform or justice reform, and they were able to send in their feedback in regards to that. So I'm going to play those videos. Once those videos play, I'm going to turn the floor over to you guys to give your feedback. But what I do want everyone to know is that this meeting is about action. So though we are having a conversation about it and we are giving feedback, at the end of the day, what we want to walk away from this meeting with is action items that we can look back at a year from now and figure out where we are with everything and how things are going, and really hopefully that we make some real change going forward. I will start that video. Give me just a second.
And can you maybe announce the subject for each video because they are all different?
Yes, ma'am. Bear with me one moment. I'm putting up the video now.
First of all, I'd like to thank Ant Mount and Jasmine Williams and Anthony McIntyre for this forum. I'd love to be doing this in person, and frankly, I'd love to be doing this live. I think the in exchange between myself and my opponent would be stronger, but this is the format that he wanted to do, so I'm happy to answer questions. Regarding police misconduct, it's critical that we end police misconduct in Lake County. First, we have to say that it's a problem. That's one of my disagreements with my opponent. He talks about things globally. He may have already spoken, I don't know. And he'll talk about racism in our society. That's not very persuasive to somebody who doesn't know that there's racism in Lake County. There's racism in Lake County. And we need to make sure that we are eliminating racism in our courts and in our police department. I am absolutely committed to a program that will do that. I've laid out a plan on my website, www.reinhardtforlakecounty.com. My opponent doesn't know. I think we should have body cameras on all offices. I'll advocate for that. I think we have to have complaints that are open to the public. People need to know what's going on with this case. We always hear about how we have good apples and bad apples. The current system right now doesn't even let us look in the barrel. We need to have a barrel that's made of glass so that we can see inside. I want people to bring complaints to our office, which will be outside of the municipal HR process, which we all know is too cumbersome, because they'll be able to bring complaints to me. My opponent has never done anything like that. I think we need to be transparent by putting these complaints up on a website. Even if we maintain some anonymity for the officers at first, people need to know what's going on in their neighborhood and in their community. Second, when there's a constitutional violation that's found by one of our judges, let's talk about it. Let's put out I don't want to say a press release, let's put out a statement about why this happened and what training will go on. Judges have been making final rulings in Lake County about whether the Constitution was violated for years, for decades. My opponent has never talked about that part of the process. And I want to say something. I had to draw a contrast with my opponent because the stakes could not be higher. I've heard him say that I'm too negative. People are going to jail. People are dying. And so if I draw a sharp contrast and if I say sharp things about him, it's because we need change in Lake County. And it's because the stakes are so high. We're not playing a game of golf here. We are trying to help people and to save lives. And so I'm going to draw a contrast throughout my answers today. Finally, with respect to police misconduct, we have to be able to speak truth to power. I've never accepted a single donation from a police unit, and I never will. I will make sure that I am able to tell the law enforcement agencies of Lake County that things have to change. And I'm making that promise to you, and I'm making that promise to my law enforcement officers and to the prosecutors who will work in my office.
So I would actually like to pull it over to State Rep Rita Mayfield if you had any feedback in regards to what Eric Reinhardt just shared in his video in regards to police misconduct.
Okay, I'm not sure if you saw the chat, but his video kept breaking up and it was very hard to understand what he was saying. I caught bits and pieces. He said something about he wanted to eliminate racism and keep body cams on. I'm in full agreement with keeping the body cams on. I did hear that piece. But then he broke up really bad and I really couldn't understand a lot of what he was saying. I know I'm just going to speak to what I heard, and that would be in regard to the body cams. The legislation that was initially passed by the General Assembly in regard to the body cams it was permissive. It said that if a police department elected to go with body cams, that everybody had to have a body cam. I don't believe that there was the intent of that legislation was for the officers to pick and choose when that body cam would be on. And I know there is trailer legislation that is coming that will require that the body cams remain on at all times. That is for both the protection of the police officer and any alleged victims. So I am totally for keeping body cams on at all times.
He also mentioned in the video, just to kind of recap it for those of you who had a hard time hearing, bringing transparency to complaints that are being made against police officers so that it would be public record for us to be able to go in and view these kinds of things, so that when a situation occurs, we can go back and have something to reference. If as of last night, actually, there was another shooting, a police involved shooting, where the body cams were off, and the individual in the passenger seat was actually killed by the police officer, and the driver was or is in critical condition. So in that type of situation, what a lot of things that come to mind would be, why was the body camera off? Considering the legislation that's currently in place right now, where it is a requirement anytime that there is a law enforcement interaction or a call, if you will. And then the second part to that would be, is there any was there any prior complaints made against the officer that was involved? So Eric Reinhardt had spoke to bringing transparency to those types of things so that we would be able to make better judgments going forward in regards to police misconduct and their behavior when interacting with the public and not having their body cameras on.
I think the question to that is, and this is a debate that is still going, at what point do you release that information to the general public? Is it available right away to the attorneys, which is what a lot of people are requesting, as opposed to just putting it out there for the general public in the midst of an investigation? So there are caveats to releasing information. I know that there is a push to have records of police officers released. Again, at what point do you release that information to the public? Is it initially at the same time that, right after a crime is alleged, or is it during the course of the investigation? Is it during the course of the lawsuit? So these are questions that are still being put forward, that are being negotiated.
Would anybody else like to comment on that?
But when does anybody feel that information should be? Because like I said, this is being negotiated. So I would definitely like that feedback. At what point do you feel that information should be released? And if it is released initially, would it impede the investigation?
Me personally, I don't think that it should be released automatically, because it can impede or manipulate the investigation. But I think that as soon as they have a full investigation, it should be released to the public as well, so they could be aware of the situation and circumstances of the incident. As you stated yesterday, something happened here in Waukegan and no body camera was on. So now we have to go based upon the officer's word alone. And we know that officers lie. I mean, I'm a prime example of what happened to me, almost 30 years ago, when they lied and they manipulated not just the public, but the court system as well. So it would be kind of like a difficult answer as to how quick it should be released, but we know that it should be released so that we can have a more clear view of what actually happened during the incident or whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. Well, we definitely need to know why his body cam was not on when he was interacting, particularly since he drew his weapon. We really need to know why he did not have that body cam turned on. That's important.
Usually with police departments, it's usually in the general orders. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What I was saying is usually it should be written in the general orders as to whatever the policy is. The policy and procedures, just like everything is. And me personally, I'm completely fully in support of 100% transparency. And I heard about the incident that happened yesterday in Waukegan, and like Mr. Mayfield said, one of the prime or main questions should be, why weren't the cameras on? And again, I'm for 100% transparency. And what I usually see, what happens is, in instances where police are fully exonerated, videos come out right away. When it's something, that can be questionable or that they don't want to see, it's usually a long time before the videos are actually released. So again, I'm for 100% transparency.
Yes, with the transparency, that is absolutely something that is, I think, is the main consensus here, that we need to be able to see, and who needs to have access to that information is a big major part of that. So I feel like going forward, that will be one of the things that we can write down to follow up on. Who gets to have access to that information? When do they get to have access to the information? And should it be public knowledge, or should it just be to the knowledge of those who can actually make a change? I'll go ahead and play Nierheim's response to that, to the police misconduct.
Don speaking?
Oh, I was speaking.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
Volume is on.
It's somebody else is speaking. So you
Yeah, I can't hear anything.
Okay. Give me just a second. Can you guys hear now?
No, can't hear anything.
Okay.
Prosecuting police officers. A little bit more nuanced situation is where you have police officers that commit misconduct, but rather than face internal discipline from their department, they simply quit and go on and work at a different police department, bringing their problem to another community.
Just a second. I see you guys still can't hear. Hold on.
I think I could actually hear at the end there.
Okay. I'm gonna try this. Give me just a second.
And the trouble with those is we don't always find out about it. So it's difficult for us to take action if we don't know, or if we find out years later. So what I've been working on to address this is the concept of police licensure, which would require police officers to be licensed. Certainly as part of that, in current law says that if police officers convicted of certain offenses, they lose their ability to become a police officer. So part of this would be to expand that list of offenses. But in addition to that, it would include a whole other category of discretionary review, where now a statewide independent body would review complaints that could come from the general public, it could come from the prosecutor, from the chief of police, regarding officer misconduct, and then they have the authority to review that again independently and then issue discipline, which could include stripping the officer of their ability to be a police officer. This would include a mandatory reporting requirement. This would include, again, independent review by a statewide body with participation panel of members from the community, and would also include a database of officers that have been found to have committed misconduct. Again, whether it's a Brady violation, which we currently have a Brady list of officers, or we're made aware of officers that have issues with regard to ethical violations. Certainly, we add those officers to our Brady list, and it doesn't just include officers that have been convicted of crimes. This includes officers that have been found. Those officers' names go on our Brady list, and that gets tendered to defense counsel. But
Jasmine, if you could just pause that real quick, please.
and again,
Yeah.
depending on the
I'm attempting to do that.
fault in the officer who's in their ability to become a police officer.
I have somehow lost control of my computer. Okay, I think it's over. Let me see.
So if I could, my apologies to everybody for the technical difficulties. It's not intentional. Of course, everybody knows that. Until everything gets under control with that, maybe we can just talk about the subjects at hand. And when we have an opportunity to get the videos right, I think we have the kind of people here that can actually speak to the issues. It would be great, and I'm sure that Jasmine will get that fixed in a minute. But in the meantime, we don't want to pause on that. Let's just go ahead and start talking about the issues. So police misconduct was the one that was discussed before. And I think prosecutorial misconduct will be next. Mr. Reinhardt was able to speak to the issue. I think we heard the bulk of what he said, but Mr. Neerheim, we did not. And I want to try and be fair with everything that we're doing. So we'll get back to Mr. Neerheim, but if we can just, I guess, move on to the next subject of prosecutorial misconduct, and maybe just see what everybody thinks about that subject before we get an opportunity to get the video up. And maybe Jasmine, if you can just, I guess, direct who you want to speak to that subject, and then we can move on when you get the video fixed.
Okay, there we go. For prosecutorial misconduct, if we can actually hear from you, Anthony, that would be, I was actually going to call on you for that. If you can give your thoughts on prosecutorial misconduct in like 2 minutes on that, and then we can go to Larnell to give his feedback on that as well.
So I think there's a lot of people who don't really know, and I may have to pass the ball to the legal scholars on the panel. There are a lot of people that I don't think really know the way the system is set up. When a person is arrested by law enforcement and the police bring the charges, and I think Jed will be able to correct me, Jed and Eugene Horton, which I don't see him up there right now for whatever reason. They would probably be more inclined to be able to know the legalities of it, but the police bring charges. The prosecutors are the ones who are supposed to prosecute the case. And they're supposed to be fair. They're supposed to be impartial, as I understand it. It looks to the masses like prosecutors' jobs is simply to put people in prison. But I think there's more to it than that. There is supposed to be an element of fairness that goes with it. And in many cases, it doesn't seem to be that way. The perception can be that prosecutors protect the case more so than the person. So if there is someone who's been arrested for a particular charge and it seems to be high profile or whatever, it seems like to some people in the population the prosecutor's office will do whatever they can to win the case. And that's not always going to end up on the side of fairness when it comes to the defendant. So if a police officer, for example, doesn't do the right thing when it comes to gathering evidence, then to me, a good prosecutor would not allow said evidence to be in the case. So misconduct to me could be something like the prosecutor knowing that this evidence wasn't properly picked up or whatever, or that somebody's not being honest when they claim to be a witness in a case, and they still allow it to be involved in the case. I think that's misconduct. That's something that has the ability to cause a jury to not have a proper picture of a particular case. And with that, the jury could very well come back and convict this individual, which would not have happened without, say, the misconduct from the prosecutor. That to me is one of the biggest problems that I see when it comes to prosecutorial misconduct, because in most cases, it's not easy to get a case overturned in court. It's very difficult. You have to bend over backwards before the appellate courts will agree with you that something rises to the occasion of, I think the standard is, would this information, if known during the trial, have made a difference if it was known? And some would argue that Juan is a great example of that. If you have evidence in a case that was planted, or you have information that was withheld from the defense, or all of that led to or could lead to a person's conviction. I mean, it just makes me wonder how many people are incarcerated right now for circumstances like that. So to me, especially right now where you have a state's attorney's race, you want to ensure that the person who's the state's attorney is going to be of such a standard that whether he wins or loses a case, he's going to make sure that everything is fair. It's not about picking a side. It's more so about fairness and making sure that the defense is given the exact same opportunity as the prosecution. So that's my take on the subject. And my hope is that, especially in this area, that we have a prosecutor, whether it is Mr. Neerheim remaining in office or Mr. Reinhardt becoming the state's attorney, that we have someone in that seat that's going to ensure that we have fairness and they don't seek to protect the prosecutors who are showing themselves not to be good people. That's my take on that, Jasmine. And I think she was wanting to go to, who did she say next?
If we can go to Larnell, that would be awesome.
Okay. To me, it's kind of simple, because the prosecutorial misconduct and police misconduct go hand in hand. And as Anthony was saying, there's supposed to be checks and balances in the system, but we all know and aware of case after case where the checks and balances don't work out. And when I say it's simple, I cannot think of there's a rare situation. As Anthony was saying, it's difficult to get a case overturned, but even the cases that we see and that we know of that are overturned, when is the last time we've seen anyone, police officer and or prosecutor or judge, which we know is difficult in itself, answer to any charges or any of the misconduct? And again, all across the country, we've seen case after case, and some of the more high profile cases where the misconduct on both parties, the police and the prosecutor, has been so blatant that somebody needs to answer for that misconduct. And it rarely ever happens. And, thinking off the top of my head, I cannot ever think of anyone actually answering to the misconduct.
If I could, that there are police officers that we know who are bad cops. We know that. And the state's attorney knows that. And when Mr. Nierheim tells us that there should be a license for a police officer and there should be an independent downstate group that judges police officer misconduct, that's all fine to talk about. But I don't believe that Mr. Nierheim can't name 3 police officers in Lake County who are just consistently lying police officers. He knows who they are, and he doesn't do anything about them. And that's wrong. If a doctor went to the head of a hospital and said, there's an epidemic in this hospital and it's killing people, I would hope that the head of the hospital would call all the heads of all the departments in that hospital and work together to fight that virus, to end that epidemic. I have no doubt that that would happen. And if it didn't happen, the head of the hospital would be fired. But if I stand in a courtroom and say to a judge, there's an epidemic of wrongful convictions in Lake County, I get told to step back. Nobody wants to hear it. They turn deaf ears and shut blind eyes to things that are going on in this county that Mr. Nierheim knows about. He knows who the bad cops are. And Farmer's right. They never bring him to justice. They never bring him to justice. In fact, what they do is they push good cops out into early retirement. And that's heartbreaking. So we have a lot of work to do as the people of this county. The few people in this live chat and the hundreds and hundreds of others listening to this on Facebook as a live stream. We have a lot of work to do because innocent men and innocent women are going to prison. And by the way, victims are being denied their day in court. When a Juan Rivera goes to prison for killing a child and he's innocent, it means that there is a child killer who is in our community who is avoiding prosecution. That should scare everybody, not just soft-hearted liberals like me, but everybody should be scared about that.
That is an absolute, that you have a really great point. Thank you guys for sharing your feedback. In the meantime, what I'm going to do, I think I was able to somehow rig this a bit. It looks like the video portion of it is what's causing the issue. So I'm going to try to play the audio portion of it and hopefully for Mr. Nierheim, and hopefully everything comes in clear. Give me just a second. Appreciate you guys' patience. Computers are amazing when everything works well.
With regard to prosecutorial misconduct, that is an area that encompasses, like police misconduct, a broad spectrum. So certainly it can include anything from a mistake to an improper argument to intentionally withholding evidence for hiding evidence. So depending on what that conduct is, it will depend on what the discipline would be, both internally by the state's attorney, in Lake County's case by me, or by the ARDC, which is the licensing body that regulates all attorneys, including prosecutors. So if a prosecutor commits misconduct, not only are they subject to liability from their employer, but they're also subjected to, independent of that, liability from the ARDC, which could include termination of their law license. Prosecutors that are subject to discipline, there is a record of those prosecutors or any attorney that's been subject to discipline by the ARDC. With respect to the other question about bond recommendations, prosecutors, certainly when we're making bond recommendations, we don't set the bond. We are looking at generally the facts of the case and somebody's criminal history, and we're making bond recommendations based on those factors. So, for example, if somebody's charged with a more serious violent crime with an extensive criminal history, the bond recommendation is going to be higher in that scenario than somebody charged with a nonviolent crime with no criminal history. And then with respect to the question about police-involved shootings and going to the grand jury, I don't believe that going to the grand jury is an appropriate way to handle those cases, because the grand jury is a secret proceeding that is controlled by the prosecutor. I believe in accountability and transparency. These are the cases where prosecutors receive the most criticism and with respect to whatever their decision is. So it's important to me that when those decisions are made, they're made by the prosecutor, because the prosecutor is the person that is going to be responsible and accountable to the public if they believe that the state's attorney made the wrong decision. And by hiding behind the grand jury and putting evidence that only you decide what they see in front of the grand jury, and then coming back and saying, well, it was their decision, frankly, I think that's a cop-out. You go to the grand jury. If you believe there's evidence sufficient to charge somebody, then you go to the grand jury and you ask them to return an indictment. But the prosecutor, the elected prosecutor, should be the one, in my opinion, that makes those determinations in terms of whether they believe the officer acted appropriately or not, because the prosecutor and not the grand jury is the one that should be accountable to the public. And I also, in Lake County, with regard to police-involved shootings, before it was required, I took the extra step and continue to do so, where I make the entire file available to the public for their review after my finding, because again, that's all part of being accountable to the public and being transparent to the public.
That was Mr. Mike Neerheim on prosecutorial misconduct, and I will play for you guys Reinhardt's response to that as well. While that's loading, we had a question be submitted via Facebook for Jed Stone. Some of you wanted to know, do police officers who are accused of committing criminal acts have to be arrested first in order for the state's attorney to press charges?
Well, certainly not. The state's attorney has this wonderful investigative tool that most of us don't have access to. It's called the grand jury. And the state's attorney can have the grand jury investigate, and it can be a long process. They have the right to subpoena witnesses and documents, and it's a secret process, secret in a good way. The state's attorney can be a proactive power in investigating police misconduct and all kinds of misconduct. We know in Illinois that governors go to prison because grand juries investigate and find misconduct. My God, if you can arrest a governor, you can arrest a cop. Should be much easier to take a bad cop off the street than to take a fat cat politician and put him in the can. But it just doesn't very often happen. And I can't think, well, that's not true. There were 2 North Chicago cops that were prosecuted maybe 30 years ago for beating a prisoner. The dispatcher had the good sense to turn on the recording device in the interrogation room so that there was a record of these police officers abusing their power and beating a young man. But no, they don't have to be arrested before they get investigated. And oftentimes the real investigations, the hard investigations, occur quietly in the background, putting together a case before there's an arrest. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you so much. I have the audio from Mr. Eric Reinhardt.
Misconduct. There couldn't be more differences between myself and my opponent. This is one of the reasons I'm running, because not only are we not seeing excellent legal work in our courtrooms, we're not. We also, unfortunately, are having prosecutors doing damage to our communities in 2 ways. First, racial profiling has never been dealt with by this office. And when prosecutors pass over an instance of racial profiling, I consider that to be prosecutorial misconduct. So when a case involves racial profiling or police officer misconduct, I think the state's attorney's office has to be the first line of defense for our communities, since, for those of you who don't know, by process, it is actually the state's attorneys who will be the attorneys who see the case first. So first, prosecutors will be the first line of defense when it comes to constitutional violations in my office. The other way that we see serious damage by prosecutors is when they're not defending or advocating effectively for victims. When this prosecutor's office is losing cases because they're not doing a good job, because they're making mistakes, or perhaps in the case of one attempt murder conviction that was reversed, it's the prosecutor's misconduct that led to the reversal of the conviction. This misconduct has been identified by the appellate courts. It's been identified in closing arguments. It's been identified with respect to discovery. But aside from racial profiling and aside from there just not being good work from the prosecutors, I actually really think this question is more about prosecutors playing a role in wrongful convictions and injustices. And the 2 injustices that we see are cases where, one, a member of our community has died potentially in the hands of police officers. I support Rita Mayfield's bill, House Bill 5800, which moves those types of cases over to the Attorney General's office. Not because I don't want to be involved in those. I want to be involved in those, and I will be when I'm the state's attorney. But because that bill, from a statewide perspective, puts the Attorney General in control of those types of investigations, which is how it should be, so that there are no conflicts of interest. So to say that again, I support House Bill 5800, which would move instances where people die in police custody over to the Attorney General's office. We need independent review of these types of cases, such as the Justice Howell case, such as the Abel Rosales case, so that we can ensure that there is a fair and independent-minded set of lawyers looking at it, rather than in the current state's attorney's office, state's attorneys who have too close of relationships with the main players. So I support that Attorney General review. My opponent has never spoken about that type of review. That's something I would ask him about if he was here. Excuse me, he's never spoken about that bill, as far as I can tell. So I would ask him that if he were here today. I think that these cases should be reviewed by grand juries, should be reviewed by outside attorney generals, whatever the case may be, potentially special prosecutors. All of those things need to happen so that we have a fair review of those types of cases. The other type of prosecutorial misconduct I can talk about in my next answer, which is wrongful convictions.
Can I just put a footnote on what Mr. Reinhardt said? There is in this country a wave of change in prosecutors' offices in Philadelphia, in Houston, in San Francisco, and in a month, actually 2 weeks in Lake County, Illinois, there is a wave of progressive change in prosecutors' offices. If you listen to the two candidates, Mr. Nierheim and Mr. Reinhardt, you get a clear sense of one of them understanding that there is a problem and seeks a solution, and the other one who says, I've been part of the problem all my political career, and I'm...
Aunt Mound LLC.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Can I just chip in too, since he threw out my bill 5800? I'd like to everybody to know that bill did pass. It is now law in California, and if we passed it here, we would be the second state in the entire country, you know, to enact that legislation. That's how important this is, you know, to have that second set of eyes, that objective view looking at some of these cases. It is extremely important, and I think it's something that we really want to push forward. It's my hope that we can get it done in veto. If not, we'll definitely be looking at it in January. But it is definitely the right direction to go, and there's a national call, you know, for scrutiny when we have these police-involved incidents.
Now, Rita, is there anything that you need from the public that can help with getting this bill passed in the state of Illinois?
Absolutely. If you go to my website, www.ritamayfield60.com, there is a link on there that says support House Bill 5800. You can do that. If you don't live in my area, you can ask your own state representative to co-sponsor the bill, ask your senators to please co-sponsor and to get on the bill. We want to make sure that we are having a push. There is an opportunity once the bill hits committee for individuals to sign on as proponents of that bill. And we will, if you sign up on my website, we will let you know when that door opens so that you can sign on as proponents. But we want to be sure that we are passing this bill and that we are getting that objective review when these incidents happen. Particularly like in last night's case where there was no body cam that was turned on. We want to have an independent review, an independent person looking at that and asking the same questions we are. Why were the body cams not on? And how can you legally say that something wrong had occurred that resulted in the death of this individual? So I think it's really good to have that higher office, you know, who really understand the law, they understand law enforcement, they understand the training that officers receive, and then they can ask these questions. I also do want to go back to, because I know State's Attorney Nierheim brought it up, that I know that our Attorney General Kwame Raoul is also pushing for it, and that is for licensure of police officers, you know, so that their records do follow them and they can't just take their problems from one police station to the next. You know, if they are bad apples, they need to be identified, and they also need to have their license looked at. You know, they need to be licensed to have that particular position and say, you know what, you've had too many incidents. You've had, you know, just too many corrective actions that have been placed against you. Maybe this was not the correct career choice for you. So I think they definitely need to have that review as well going forward.
And I would just add on to that, that I think it's, you know, it's that Kwame Raoul asked Mike Nierheim to be one of the few state's attorneys in the state to help him put together that legislation. And Mike Nierheim's working on that thing. And I was frankly kind of surprised, Jed. You know, I know you're kind of in campaign mode, but you seem to dismiss that that effort. And I was just kind of wondering why you thought it was not a big deal, and why that's not a positive step that Mike Nierheim and Kwame Raoul are working on.
Well, I think it is a big step, but I also think Mr. Nierheim knows who the bad cops are in Lake County, and his office has done nothing about it. He knows who the bad prosecutors are in his office. And, you know, if you look at the prosecution of wrongfully convicted people in the last 10, 15 years in that office, we know who's running that show. It wasn't Mike Waller. It was his first assistant. And remarkably, That first assistant is the first assistant now, again, still under Mr. Nierheim. That's a problem. And it's a problem that he can't run away from.
So how many wrongful convictions have there been under Mike Nierheim?
I don't know the answer to that.
Zero. 62,000 cases, zero wrongful convictions. You know, so I feel like you're sort of in campaign mode, sort of painting this picture of this wrongful convictions under Mike Nierheim's leadership, but the facts and the evidence don't bore that out. So, you know, I didn't know that this is a campaign event, but it seems like you're sort of in campaign mode. And so I just, you know,
I'm not in the least in campaign mode. I'm in Lake County's been the epicenter of wrongful convictions, and we need to do something about it.
It was prior to Mike Nierheim, but now after 8 years of Mike Nierheim, there hasn't been any, which is, I think, positive development.
I don't know.
Not to say it's not a problem, you know, and that's why I think we're working on trying to create this licensure program and stuff, and really trying to address some of these problems. But I think just to dismiss some of the efforts that Kwame Raoul are working on and Mike Nierheim are working on, you know, because it's kind of expedient sort of political arguments, I think it's maybe, you know, creating a misleading sort of perspective of what's going on in Lake County right now.
Philippe, I'm sorry you think that. I'm not the least bit in campaign mode. I am in, we need to make sure that bad cops and bad prosecutors are taken care of. And I don't get the sense, forget about the campaign. If this were a year ago, I'd be saying the same thing. I don't get the sense that this current state's attorney's administration is doing anything about it. And that's wrong.
We have another question from the viewers on Facebook, and it is, does the state's attorney's office intend to defend every FOIA request regarding any police shooting incidents or traffic stops prior to any civil filings? Does anybody feel like they can answer that? That would really be a Mike or an Eric question. So if they were here live, we would be able to do that. Alyssa, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I'm glad we're talking about misconduct. The other piece that voters across Illinois, this applies in every county, need to consider is discretion. And this gets back to transparency. We need to know more about how prosecutors use their discretion. Restore Justice looked at a lot of data, particularly as it relates to people who received extreme sentences as kids. And we know that prosecutors use tools to go after Black and Latino kids at much higher rates, that Black and Latino kids are much more likely, sorry, a bit of a cold, but they're much more likely to be charged with felony murder, with accountability, with firearm enhancements. So that's this other piece. And there, you know, we need more transparency so we can see those numbers in clearer focus, but we know they exist. And we know that for these same sorts of incidents, white kids are not given those add-ons. So I think discretion is the piece that should come as we talk about misconduct.
I would like to chime in on this. Philippe, I know you were speaking about Nierheim not having any wrongful convictions since he's been in office. Again, yet. I know of a case of Williford from North Chicago, which my case was brought up into that case 8 years after I was convicted of the 1992 murder of Holly Staker. Right now, he has Jeff Pavletic, which was the second state's attorney with Michael Waller, who convicted me, planted evidence, fabricated evidence. He's still in office today as his right-hand man. So for a person to say that he's still trying to correct the miscarriage of justice or the wrongful conviction, that's an ironic way of showing it when his right-hand man is the person that personally prosecuted me, degraded my name, and made me look like a monster in the public eye. I'm not saying that Nierheim has done anything at the moment, but as you said, he's been there short time. In the short time that he has been there, he has not shown any kind of actions to diffuse these wrongful convictions that happened prior to him. As we know right now, he's not the only state's attorney in that office prosecuting individuals. So for us to state that he hasn't shown any kind of malicious intent, well, his right-hand man is the person that put me in jail for the rest of my life at the age of 19 and tried to give me the death penalty. It took 20 years for me to fight for my freedom. And still to this day, not one individual, whether it be police officer, judicial misconduct, state's attorney, or anybody has been either prosecuted or even their pension or anything done to them based upon their misconduct. So we have to look at not just what he's doing now, but what he's doing from what he brought in. Because remember, he's bringing in a lot of baggage from the past. He needs to try to correct that. At this point, I haven't seen that. So I'm speaking personal, not in the sense of one is better than the other. But if you're going to tell us that you're going to do something better for the community, you need to show actions, not just words, because words, the wind takes that. And a lot of politicians, a lot of state's attorneys, a lot of officers, that's what they do. They use their authority because they know they can do that, and the public just accepts it and believes it. It's only a few of us that really pay attention to their demeanor and their actions. So I'm just speaking in my behalf as far as, what I've seen.
Yeah. And
Philippe, before you respond to that, I'm going to go ahead and that's going to roll us into our next point of the wrongful conviction piece. So I will play Mike Nierheim's response to wrongful conviction.
Wrongful convictions certainly have a significant negative impact to the community. They impact, obviously, the person that's been wrongfully convicted. They also impact the entire criminal justice system because people lose faith. And they cost the communities money, and the real perpetrator escapes justice. So this is an issue that's been incredibly important to me, and I've formed in Lake County the first of its kind case review panel to address what I believe is the root cause of wrongful convictions, which is cognitive bias or tunnel vision. It goes by several different names, but the bottom line is people have a tendency to hear a set of facts and they kind of hone in on their belief in terms of that's what happened, and they can disregard facts that show that they may be wrong. The majority of cases that I've looked at, not just in Lake County, but around the country and studying these, are situations where everybody at the time believed they had the right person and they didn't. And that's tough because it's hard to prevent that. I believe the best way to prevent that is to bring as many fresh eyes on cases as you possibly can after the fact, but also to put protocols into place ahead of time to make sure that cases like this don't happen anymore. So our case review panel is made up of people that were not part of these original cases. They don't work in the office. These are independent people from a variety of backgrounds, retired judges, civil rights lawyers, civil attorneys, people that really don't have any preconceived notion on these cases that can come in and give them a completely fresh review. In my case review panel has worked with me where I make the final call on these cases, but they give me perspective in a fresh set of eyes that's really important. And there's been 4 people in Lake County that whose cases I've dismissed after our review of these cases. And that's important for people to note that this is something that we've actually taken action on and not just talked about. Certainly another part of this is what do you do after a situation where somebody's been wrongfully convicted? And that's where the concept of sentinel review comes in, where you piece apart that case and you take it apart and you find out what went wrong and where. Was it a situation with forensic evidence that was overlooked, or was evidence not tested that could potentially be retested today? Was it an issue with the identification? Was it an issue with the confession or the statement? Find out what went wrong on the particular case and then address that by putting protocols, as I said, into place to ensure that these cases don't happen anymore. And that's what we've been doing here in Lake County.
That was a response from Mike Nierheim. I will play for you all the response from Eric Reinhardt. Philippe, if you want to go ahead and give your feedback to that, I'll give you 2 minutes on that.
I was gonna just bring up, first of all, Juan, your experience I can't imagine anything worse than, so when I'm saying my stuff, please understand that I am not dismissing what happened.
I agree.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
In fact, I have huge admiration and I think, God acts in mysterious ways. I'm sure you had a positive influence on people, but
Definitely.
yeah, I was going to bring up that case. I'm a civil libertarian, so I'm very strong believer in civil liberties and people's individual rights, and sort of are suspicious of the ability of government abuse and overreach. And so that's one of the reasons that I was I think that case review panel it was a pretty progressive and pretty good idea. Mike said it the best, just fine, so I really can't add anything. But I think the point is that, people, it's the human condition, and people kind of like the prosecutors, they feel like that's guilty. They got the conviction that reinforces their feelings. And so I think it is, it's really important to have different people in the community who aren't involved in the original case or don't have any alliances or any, to those people to review it and give it a fresh set of eyes and really look at it from a different perspective. So, I hope that's a program that continues, because I think it's a good one.
I mean, I agree. There should be a program that is separate from the individuals that are in office, which while I was incarcerated, I remember when that came out here in Lake County. And I believe it was a good aspect, because at least like it states, separate eyes, new ears, so they'll look at it in a different aspect. But when you still have individuals in the same office that are still in your other ear, talking to you, telling you what to do. Prime example, in my case, Mike Neerheim stated that they look at people's background, their upbringing, what they were doing in their life and all that. Here I am, and again, I can only speak about myself, not about nobody else, but I do know other individuals that have gone through the same thing, such as Angel Gonzalez from Lake County. You have Benny Starks from Lake County. These are all individuals that were only convicted by Mike Waller, not Neerheim. Still, while Neerheim is in office, he knows that a lot of those same individuals are still in office being officers. And yes, you have a panel. Yes, you have individuals that are trying to change aspects of the judicial system. But when you still have individuals that are still in the system that were there before, still dictating of, well, this person we should get, this person we should give them a time plea, play Russian roulette with individuals' lives because we don't have the income to pay for a expensive attorney that is capable of defending you to the utmost respect. Not that public defenders don't, but they get so many caseloads that they try to do the best that they can. In order for you to do something different, yes, you have to have different eyes, but you have to come in with a different mentality. You can't say just because a person was arrested, that person is guilty, because if that's the case, all of us should be in prison because all of us are guilty of something in life. That's not the issue here. The issue is, what does the evidence present? Are there overzealous cops that have tunnel visions that since a case happened that is never happened like this in Waukegan, Lake County, Chicago, we need to get that person before I lose my seat. And I think that's the issue, is that a lot of people are looking at, I'm here in this seat and I'm comfortable compared, let me make sure that my community is happy with what I'm doing, because it isn't about the paycheck. Paychecks come, paychecks go, but lives only end one time. You can't give them a second time. Not everybody has that strength or that zeal to continue while they're in prison, to get an education, to better themselves, because according to the community society, we are a lost cause. We are in prison because we did something wrong. They throw away the key. Now we screwed. I got a blessing that I had individuals that supported me, that believed in my innocence, such as Jess Stone from the very beginning. But look how many death threats I still get today. I still got to walk around watching my back. And did they even apologize? No, they didn't care what happened to me. To this day, they still don't care what happens to me or the family of the victim. To them, the case is done. So how is it that you're trying to prevent this from continuing happening when you're not even trying to correct the past?
What I'm going to do is play Reinhardt's response to wrongful convictions and see if he is able to answer any of those questions that you have.
When it comes to how to deal with this office's history of wrongful convictions, this is the area where I disagree the most with my opponent. He says that he's fulfilled his campaign promise. He says that he's turned around the culture. No, he hasn't. I've been in this courthouse every day, nearly every day, for 17 and a half years. This is where my practice is. This is where I started as a young public defender. I was in the public defender's office when they wrongfully prosecuted Jerry Hobbs. I was in the public defender's office as the appeals came down about Juan Rivera. As we saw Juan be tried time and time again, we saw that wrongful convictions are real. And the people who were involved in the Jerry Hobbs and the Juan Rivera case are still in the office. But what's worse is that the chief deputy of the current office, Jeff Pavletic, personally prosecuted Juan Rivera. He personally prosecuted Jerry Hobbs. When it comes to Jerry's case, the state's attorney's office under Mike Waller elected to execute Jerry Hobbs. Thankfully, he was exonerated. My point is, they would have executed him on a false confession. They would have executed him on wrongful DNA evidence. My opponent has personally praised Mike Waller. When the reversal finally came down from the appellate court in December of 2012, December of 2011. In December of 2011, the appellate court, that's how you know that I'm not re-recording these. When it came down in December of 2011, we got to see Juan hug his family and be free finally after 20 years of being wrongfully held. A few months later, at a Republican debate for this very job, after he knew that the decision had been handed down, my opponent praised Mike Waller and even talked about how he thought that the appellate courts were going too far. We have the video. Go look for the video. It's the Republican debate for the 2012 primary. That's what's in his heart. That's what he thinks. Regardless of what he says now, he continues to praise Jeff Pavletic and Mike Waller. That's how you know that they haven't turned the page, because Jeff Pavletic is still there, because there is not a new set of ethics guidelines, because there's not a handbook that every state's attorney signs off on that deals with opening up your files to prosecutors. It's still a closed and secretive culture when it comes to the nitty-gritty of prosecuting. When I'm state's attorney, that'll end. We will have new ethics training with respect to the discovery issues. We'll have new ethics training when it comes to how to handle DNA evidence. And we can't trust Jeff Pavletic to run that training. And he's the man who would be doing that or not doing that. We don't really know. And so it's important that we have a change at the top. It's important that we have a new culture. It's important that prosecutors be held accountable for their mistakes instead of just being moved around courtrooms, which is the current approach. When something goes wrong in a case, that prosecutor is going to be meeting with me and is going to be dealing with the principles that this campaign has been about. I don't have any specific personnel decisions in mind, except that everybody who's going to work for me when I win will have agreed that wrongful convictions is at the heart of what must change in this office.
Anthony McIntyre, are you on? I think you might be. That's all right. I will go ahead and move to the next point. Give me just a second.
Can I say something real quick?
Yes, you can. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. We're talking about the wrongful convictions and everything, and then going back a little bit as to some things that were said earlier. I look at Waukegan, and we're talking about the lack of any follow-up, per se, when it comes to wrongful convictions, and the misconduct on the police officers and from the prosecutor's office and everything. I have a simple question or a simple point. I know in Waukegan and most police departments, when an officer is involved in anything or it's proven that they, that the misconduct was not justified, but they did commit some type of crime, as it usually comes out to be. When is the last time we've seen anyone that's actually fired? So we have these instances where they aren't fired, they're allowed to resign. So in essence, that's why their license or their certification isn't lifted, because they essentially were not fired. So they were allowed to resign, and then they end up on the police departments. I think that's a major concern right there before it even gets to the state's attorney's office.
Yeah, I think that accountability is one of the main things that the community wants to see when it comes to situations such as these. It's not just enough to allow them to resign or to just go on about their life when a life was lost unnecessarily. So what the people really want, what based off of the feedback that I've personally received, what people want to see is accountability. And yes, you know, we can implement having police officers be licensed, but if you allow them to quit, that would in essence create a loophole. So how tight are we going to have, how tight is this whole licensing thing going to be, would be a question that would need to be brought up with that being put into place. I'm going to go ahead and play the next video for, this is on race and how it impacts justice. I believe this response is from Mr. Mike Neerheim.
Race impacts the criminal justice system. There's no doubt about it. We have to first acknowledge that it exists. We know that there are disparities in criminal justice involvement based on race. There are differences in incarceration rates, conviction rates, you name it. And sadly, you can tie those historically around the country to race. And this is a problem that has plagued our criminal justice system for many, many years. So again, we have to acknowledge that this exists. And then it's about what are you doing to prevent it and what are you doing to address it and make sure that it's not impacting your decision making. As a prosecutor, we have an awful lot of discretion. We decide what charges are brought in a particular case, what bond we're going to recommend, what plea we're going to offer. And we have to make sure that we are not allowing bias to creep into those decision-making processes that we all use every day. We've brought in outside organizations to study our charging decisions, our plea negotiations to ensure that race is not creeping into those decision-making processes. So it's also about training. It's about making sure that we're training our staff and law enforcement on issues like cultural competency, cultural awareness, implicit bias, cynicism. These are all areas that we have to make sure we're continuing to train on, and that's what we do here in our office in Lake County. And we also have to make sure that we're making opportunities available to everybody, regardless of their means, regardless of where they're from. Certainly, we have programs like drug court, veterans court, mental health court. We have an opiate diversion court. These are all designed to give people second chances or third chances or fourth chances sometimes. We also I created the alternative prosecution program, which is a way to help people with low-level nonviolent felony offenses avoid a conviction. It's important to me that this program is open to everybody, regardless of where they're from, regardless of who their attorney is. You don't even need an attorney to take part in this program. So again, making sure that those second chances aren't just available for people with high-priced lawyers. And lastly, we have to make sure that we're giving every opportunity we can to help people avoid criminal justice involvement in the first place. That's why I helped create the A Way Out program, which helps get people struggling with addiction access to treatment without an arrest by going through the police. And we've had hundreds of people here in Lake County take part in that and get access to care, again, regardless of who they are, where they're from, or what their means are.
Alyssa, can you go ahead and comment on that?
Yeah, I'm glad to hear, a discussion about race. I think we need to be honest that race impacts every single stage of the criminal legal system, from who gets pulled over, who gets searched when they get pulled over, to who gets charged and with what the sentence is. And then we actually know even in prison, Black and Latino people in prison are much more likely to get disciplinary tickets, which can prevent them from going home sooner. So it's a problem at every single stage. And I think the percentage of Black people who are in prison in Illinois is something like they're 54% of the Illinois prison population, despite being less than 50% of the state population. And that's a direct result of racism. and that racism is in every aspect of American life, right? It's not just the criminal system, but it is in the criminal legal system. So we need to deal with it. So I'm grateful for that conversation. And I think I just want to say it has to be a proactive movement. We did a report at Restore Justice about who got early releases from prison since March. So with COVID raging in our state, including in our prisons, who was released early? And we know that despite being something like 30% of the prison population, almost 50% of those who were released early were white people. And they were actually released earlier in terms of the number of days than their Black and Latino peers. And that's because we have to correct for that. So we have to go in and say, you have a more extreme sentence, so we're not even considering you for release. You have more disciplinary tickets, so you're not being considered for release. But we have to look at the way racism made that the reality. We have to proactively figure out how to move forward.
I'm so glad you brought that up about those that were actually released during COVID. The majority of those were white women. We actually got those numbers, and it was appalling, the number of African-American and Latinos who were passed over, and a lot of them had low-level crimes. So you're absolutely right, but they had been constantly ticketed, and some of them were in there for nonviolent offenses, but yet they were not allowed to get out. And it just really didn't make any sense at all. I know that myself and several other legislators have been really pounding on the governor's office for, how the decisions were made to allow the individuals who got out to get out while maintaining those that are in there. It just truly did not make a bit of sense at all. On a more local level, if you look at the prosecutions that are still coming through Lake County, there still is a disproportionate number of Black and brown versus Caucasian, even within some of these second chance programs. There's a disparity in the number of Black and brown individuals who are given second chances as opposed to those who are not. So I think that really does still need to be looked at. There's some issues there. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement within the SA office. If you look at the number of African American and Latinos that actually work in the office, the ratio is extremely low. You can't tell me that you can't find any Black or brown attorneys or clerks or anything along those lines, because we know that is not true. They talk about outside organizations that are reviewing processes. Who are these outside organizations? They're definitely not the NAACP or any other Black organization that's taking a look at what's going on and how these charges are being assessed. We know that there is this push to just convict. And a lot of times, the individual really could have benefited from a second chance program. There's a gentleman that I helped to just get released out of prison. Like Juan, he was convicted at 19 for something that he didn't do. He spent 20 years in prison, 30 years in prison. Yeah, he spent 30 years in prison for a offense that he didn't commit simply because he was involved with gangs. He was hanging out with the wrong people. And the prosecutor at that time felt it was better just to go ahead and just lock him up for life than, to have to deal with him down the road. But that was somebody who was actually out here now and making a difference in the community, whose life was definitely negatively impacted, by a prosecutor who was more interested in getting a conviction than doing the right thing for that individual.
I'm going to go ahead and play Eric Reinhardt's response to that.
To race and how it impacts justice. Let me be very clear about a couple things. Racism exists in our country. It has for centuries. It started, obviously, in the 1600s. That is the challenge of America. Slavery is America's original sin, and we continue to deal with its impact to this very day. When I was a public defender, I started in 2003, it became very clear to me that race would be playing a role in the rest of my career as a criminal defense attorney. The numbers are staggering in Lake County. Our jail is 35% African American, but of course our population is only 7% African American. There was a study in April of 2020, that showed in 2018, you were 10 times more likely to be arrested for a marijuana charge if you were Black than if you were white. That means you were feeling the handcuffs or being sent to jail or in the back of a squad car over a marijuana charge when it was illegal in 2018 if you were black, as opposed to white people who were being given tickets or warnings, whatever the case may be. That study is devastating. It is a devastating indictment of how Lake County does things. And it was 10 times more likely, it was only 7 times more likely in the rest of the state. That should have been a moment of reflection in our courthouse. That should have been a moment when we all said, what's going on here? My opponent said nothing. My opponent hasn't even acknowledged this report. He's never answered a question about it. It's something else I would ask him about if he was here. We need increased implicit bias training for our young prosecutors, for me too, all of our prosecutors. We need to move that. It's at about 12% of what's recommended. So we need to move it up to what is fully recommended. We need to make sure that our office reflects the diversity of our community. Right now, there is only 2 African-American attorneys in the office out of 60 or 61. And there are only 2 Latinos who are in the office out of an office of 61. We need to do better. We need to make sure that the office's attorneys, the people who are dealing with the cases in the courtroom, reflect the community, reflect the county, reflect the communities that need to be protected by our courthouse. That's how we're going to get justice. That's how we're going to begin to do better. But we also have to have statistics. I've heard my opponent speak over and over again about his Way Out program, and he keeps saying that 800 people have been gone through his Way Out program. He just says that. We don't have any statistics on that. I don't know if those are repeat, if one person is counted twice, if they go in more than once. But we certainly haven't seen any statistics when it comes to race. We don't have any statistics in our courthouse when it comes to who is receiving the alternative prosecution program. All of this needs to be put onto statistics so that we can measure implicit bias, so that we can say to our prosecutors or our judges, why are these racial disparities existing? We know they exist when it comes to racial profiling from the Department of Transportation. We know they exist from the Chicago Tribune report, but we need to measure this so that we can see exactly how large the problem is when it comes to implicit bias with respect to resolutions of cases. I will be committed from day one to doing everything I can to ending the expression of racism in our justice system. I can't promise you I'll end it because we're just going to be dealing with human beings and it's in people's hearts. But we have to do everything we can to end the external expression of it as best we can.
Anthony McIntyre, I see you're back. I know you had some technical difficulties. Did you have anything to add to that? You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So racism, like, it's a weird thing, right? And I say weird only because that's got to be the biggest elephant in every room around the country that I've ever seen that's invisible. And I think that the systemic racism that exists in the criminal justice system, it's weird to me, the denial that exists around this country on this subject. You have an individual who is a Christian. He is a white supremacist. He is a, I don't know, carpenter, whatever it is that he does anyone believe that when that individual goes into whatever job they have, that they're not going to take their beliefs into it? I don't know who would believe that. You see it all the time. So if you have an individual who is a believer in God, you will most likely see that when he gets on the bench, if he's a judge. I make this point all the time. You will see his Christian beliefs come out as he executes whatever justice he sees fit to do so in the courtroom. No one should believe that if that same judge was brought up a full-blown racist that felt like Black people were scum or shovels or whatever tools, that he's not also going to push that same belief system into how he executes justice in the courtroom. I'm not certain why people would play that game. I don't know what the system is that corrects that type of behavior. In most cases, as I understand it, it's just based on a record. And if you get enough attorneys to complain about something that they see in the courtroom, then only then will somebody say, okay, well, if you have 10 of these or 20 of these, then I guess now we'll say that's enough of a record to say that we may need to do something about it. But those aren't just regular numbers. Those 20 numbers represent people who have already been adversely affected by your racism. That's real, right? I'm not certain how to really address the subject because it is deep, but I do know that one way in which to balance the playing field is to have more people of a diverse nature in the system. So where law enforcement is concerned, I'm really tired of the deck being stacked in a way that allows people to come back and say, you know what, we don't have more African Americans on the police force because they don't apply. They don't seek out to become law enforcement officers. Nobody wants to go backwards and say, why is that? Right? Why would they want to be a police officer when they've come up in a particular lifestyle, when they've been adversely affected as they have, or maybe their father, uncle, or whatever was affected by it, or they just simply turn on the TV and see people who look just like them, who are treated in a certain way by people who wear a particular uniform, and they act the same. I'm notorious for saying these institutions around here gangbang more than the Bloods and Crips. Yet they expect for the people who do the exact same thing that they do to do things different. And it's sickening to me. And one of the reasons why this was so important to put this type of an event together, minus all of the technical difficulties that'll probably be the talk of tomorrow, and people will lose what the real meaning of this was. Let's just focus on the content. I don't know why the police department, the state's attorney's office, and all the rest of these people within the criminal justice system, why don't y'all recruit? Why don't y'all go into the high schools the way the military does, right? The military will go straight into the high school and they're like, look, come join us. And they give them all of those positive reasons why that's a good idea to do. But I don't see police departments or state's attorneys or whatever. I don't see them in there. And you start them off young. Maybe you need to find a way to change their mentality so they don't look at the police as the enemy. And they take that belief into the streets or into their homes, into their little friends groups, and they push it. So my hope is that where racism in the system is concerned, there are actions that people in control who are in these number one positions, there are actions that they can take to minimize the chances that racism will adversely affect some innocent person. And I think that's one of the ways in which to do so. There's a whole bunch more I could say on this, but I don't want to hog the time.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and for the sake of time, I know we're at 8:30 already. What I will do, I'm going to wrap it up with both Nirhan and Reinhardt's commitment to the community, and then you guys can give your closing remarks at that point in time.
So my commitment to the community is, first of all, I'm going to remain active in the community. I was born and raised in Waukegan. I've spent my entire life in Lake County. I've been active in working with the community even before I ever thought of running for state's attorney. And those that know me know that I'm no stranger. I don't come around every 4 years. I've been active ever since I've been elected and even before. And I've said this many times. I believe that the vast majority of people that interact with the criminal justice system, they're not bad people. These are people that struggle oftentimes with a substance abuse issue, a mental health issue, or many times a combination of both of those things. And I really believe the best way to approach these issues isn't waiting until they get arrested and then addressing them through the court process. The best way to address these is to help people before they've ever been arrested, before they ever have contact with the criminal justice system at all. And that's why I helped create the A Way Out program that has helped almost 800 people in Lake County get access to substance abuse treatment through the police without arrest, regardless of where they're from or what type of resources they have. The next step is to follow up to make sure that we're doing the same for people with mental illness. So I'm working to create a mental health crisis center right here in Lake County. This will be a place where people struggling with substance abuse or mental illness that need help but don't want to go through the police can walk in off the street and get the help that they need without ever even coming into the criminal justice system. It will also serve as a drop-off center for the police. So when they're out there interacting with people, again, struggling with mental illness, maybe in a mental health crisis or struggling with substance abuse, rather than arrest these people and take them to jail, they can bring them to this crisis center where they can be evaluated and get put into touch with services without an arrest, without any penetration into the criminal justice system. And I think in doing so, we're going to do a lot of good for our community, and we're going to make sure that we're doing everything we can do to help these people, again, before they ever get arrested in the first place. And that's a promise that I'm making. I will complete this project. This is something that has been talked about for years. A lot of people have worked on, but this is something that we are going to get done here in Lake County. And that's one of the many things I plan to accomplish in my third term as the state's attorney in Lake County.
And I will play for you all Mr. Reinhardt's response as well. While I'm getting that together, Alyssa, did you want to kind of explain how any type of action plans that your organization that you're partnered with can help with anything that was mentioned tonight?
Yeah, so Restore Justice, in a normal universe, we spend our time advocating for changes to sentencing and prison laws. So we focus particularly on people who got extreme sentences in their youth. We actually came out of the movement to ban juvenile life without parole sentences. And in 2012, the Supreme Court did ban mandatory life sentences for people who were under 18. So we are moving forward in that work. Right now we are focused, and actually Representative Mayfield leads the way on a lot of this. So we are focused on how we can help lawmakers who have this vision for reforming our system. Some of the things we are currently focused on are ending juvenile life without parole. So Illinois already, under Representative Mayfield's leadership and others, banned mandatory life sentences for juveniles. The next step for us is to ban life without parole sentences. We think everyone sentenced before they are 21 should have that parole review. We are not saying that no one gets life, but we need that parole review. People, youth and young adults are uniquely capable of rehabilitation. So that is one of our biggest priorities. We are also pushing for amendments, changes to our state's felony murder and accountability laws, which are extremely broad. In Illinois, it's extremely easy for a person, including a young person, to be convicted of a murder they not only didn't commit, but didn't plan to commit, weren't present for. So those are our big focuses. Right now, we are deeply concerned about COVID in our prisons. Cases are extremely high in our state, and they are high in prisons. You can go on to the IDPH website and you can look at the cases in prisons right now. And even with what seems to be pretty minimal testing, there are outbreaks at facilities. There are facilities that are nearing 40% right now based on the number of people with COVID. And prisons are old in Illinois. We have prisons, I believe Pontiac opened in 1871, and I believe Menard opened in the late 1870s. And they are falling apart in good times. They are not meant for two people to be living in a cell smaller than many people's closets or bathrooms. So the two things we need, and this is our action plan, we need more testing. And so we are putting the focus on asking IDOC to test every incarcerated person at regular intervals so that advocates and family members can understand what the spread truly is like. And then we are asking for transparency. We want to know how many people have been tested. We want to know how many people are positive so that we know that percent positivity rate in a facility. And we want to know how many people have died in prisons because of COVID. So we, to accomplish that, are working with family members. We are doing monthly days of action with our network, and our network is mostly people who have incarcerated loved ones or people who were themselves incarcerated. So those days of action, on those days of action, we will, be calling the governor's office and, using social media and email to ask people to join us. So, I just want to say about Restore Justice, that community engagement is at the heart of our work. We actually really came out of a support group for parents parents and siblings who had children or siblings who were sentenced to life before their 18th birthdays, and we maintain that focus. So, we always want people who are directly affected by the system to join us. You can find us online or on social media. And there are a lot of ways to get involved, even when we are in this remote world.
And I'm sorry, what was the website again? So we can put it in the chat.
Yeah, we are restorejustice.org. And if you go to the bottom of our website, you have our MailChimp sign up, and that's where we will, before the day of any day of action, we will send out an email.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We went ahead and put that in the pin that in the comments on Facebook so our viewers can go ahead and help out with that. This is Eric Reinhardt's commitment to the community.
My commitment to the community is this. I'll always answer your questions. I'm not going to back out of tough forums. I'm not going to back out of programs because I don't know what the format is. Disagree with my opponent deeply when he did that 10 days ago now. It's hard to keep track of time in the campaign season. But last Monday, he refused to come to a debate because he says he didn't know the rules. I would have agreed to any rule he wanted if we got to talk about the issues to those young people. I've agreed to the rules tonight, even though I would have preferred a live exchange. I'm going to always be open with you. I'm always going to be honest with you. And I'm not going to hide behind cliches and platitudes. It's very easy to say that somebody is experienced, or it's very easy to just say we've done these things. We have to have statistics. We have to have facts. And it's not that this campaign is dedicated to statistics above all else. It's that only when we have transparency and real measures of our success that we can be accountable to the people. And I think that's what this campaign is about, being accountable. I'm going to have open town halls with individuals. I'm going to move the prosecutors out into the community more. We're wasting too much time in our courtrooms. Come watch a courtroom sometime. All prosecutors do most of the day, most of the mornings, is report to judges on status. That can be streamlined. We need to have our prosecutors in the community, meeting with the survivors of crime, meeting with law enforcement, meeting with lab personnel. So it's very important to me that we do that. And I think that that's how we're going to begin to restore the link that's been lost between the people and our current justice system. We also need to make sure that our community panels are open. We need to make sure that our community panels are open to the public. Right now, my opponent won't even say who's on the community panels. He won't even say when they meet or what they do. Some things may be private. It may be important that my victims advisory panel, for example, is private. But we're still going to have outputs. We'll still have some open meetings. There are private matters. It doesn't apply to your general community panel. My opponent calls it a citizen panel, by the way. The state's attorney's office protects everybody in the community, protects all of the residents, regardless of their citizenship status. It's things like that that I think show his mindset and how he's failed. But in any event, my commitment to the community is that I will have town halls, that we'll have open meetings of my community panel, that we'll do the best we can to have open meetings of my victims advisory panel, which there's not one now, but we will have open statistics on both crime trends and also racial profiling so that we can measure and fix these problems. This isn't a competition of rhetoric. This isn't a competition of who can have the fancier billboard or more signs. This is about results. And we have to be able to measure results in order to hold people accountable. I've heard people say that it's easy for me to promise these things and then not deliver. I've never run for office before. I haven't failed to deliver anything because I haven't been in office before. I don't like it when I hear young people saying, well, they're going to opt out because they don't trust any politicians. I've never run before. I'm going to follow through on these promises of transparency. We may have disagreements in the future, but let's have those disagreements in open rather than in back rooms or not having them at all. I will listen to the people. I will meet with the people. You can judge me based on my results. You're recording this, I assume. You can play this in the future if I'm not doing what I said I'm going to do. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time with this forum. This is really important. I look forward to the format where now the people will discuss, or the panelists will discuss our answers. And I'm happy to do this again, and I'm happy to have a live exchange with Mike whenever he's willing to meet me. Thank you again. Thank you to Anthony and Jasmine and all of the panelists.
Now, what we can do is, so for tonight, there was a lot that was discussed, and I know we went a bit over time, so I appreciate you all's patience in tuning in today and being on the panel. We honestly could not have done this without you guys. Appreciate your patience with all of the technical difficulties, but we got through it nonetheless. And I feel like we got some really good things from this forum. One of the main things, few of the main things that we actually talked about is accountability. We need to see what that looks like in regards to these new laws that are going to be put into place in the laws that are here now. What does accountability look like? The licensing for police officers, that's great, but are there any loopholes with allowing them to quit? Does that, how does that impact their ability to transition through other police departments and commit the same crimes or misconduct, if so you will? And also in regards to just overall treatment of the Black and Brown community in the eyes of law enforcement. That is a loaded topic there, and there's a lot to it, but basically getting down to the nitty gritty of what it is that we can do. Those stats from Melissa, actually, those are amazing to see, amazing to hear. Everybody, I definitely encourage you to go to her organization's website to partner with them to help with their commitments to the community. All of this information we discussed tonight, extremely important. When it comes to the House Bill, it's House Bill 58, right, Rita? Yes, House Bill 58.
5800.
5800, okay. House Bill 5800. Reach out to your representatives, get them on the horn when it comes to this. It is extremely important that we get this passed. We would be the second state in the United States in order to do this. So long story short, we cannot do this without you guys, the viewers, you guys, the panel, and we will come back together to see where we are in regards to action items going forward. If anybody has anything else, any quick, very quick closing remarks, you can go ahead and share that now. Anthony, I'm gonna throw it over to you. Did you have anything you wanted to say? You're on mute.
I make a lot of noise. I try not to disturb you all. My hope was that, we would have been able to really just have everyone give something that you, from whatever seat that you sit in, can do to contribute to criminal justice reform. That was my hope. I think that a lot of information was put out, but I really don't want for individuals watching this to see this as basically just another opportunity for people to come together and pontificate or just complain about certain things, but more so put some solutions on the table. And I am hearing some options for some of the things that can happen, but criminal justice reform. I keep saying that word reform. The system is broken. And the system is broken and it needs to be fixed. Is the system broken to the point where it needs to be replaced? Is it a matter of blowing it up and repairing or fixing leaks? I don't know, but I do know that there is, based on population, there are too many people of color in prison. The cause of that, I mean, we can beat it up until we're blue in the face, but we have to do something about it. The system is not right. Systemic racism is real. I believe the number is somewhere around 80 some odd % of the people who are in prison, the crimes that they've been convicted of have an economic foundation. When we think about that, that means that out here in the streets, you know, here it is a person, I did 19 years in prison for a murder I didn't commit. Jed was actually my attorney. It was clear that I didn't commit the crime, but I still did all of that time anyway. And it's one of the reasons that I tell young people, don't think that just because you didn't commit a crime, but you're present during the crime, that won't be enough for this particular criminal justice system to still say you're guilty. You're close enough to it. And because you're close enough to it, well, I can get my statistics padded because all I want is the conviction. That's one of my concerns with prosecutors around the country. And it's one, I wish I would have asked this question before, but I wonder if there is any sort of promotion criteria that is connected to convictions. I don't know. Do they get promoted based on how many people they put in prison? Are police officers promoted based on arrests? Is that a part of the 5 or 6 different points that get you promoted up the chain of command? I'm curious about that. And if it is, we are incentivizing individuals to just simply put a person in jail, and they don't have to be guilty, and the system will protect them. So I would love for some of what comes from tonight to be in this election cycle, because I mean, let's be real. In an election cycle, you know, in many cases, no offense to the politicians on the panel, politicians tend to say things that, you know, it's designed to entice people to vote for them. And in many cases, for that first period of time when they get into office, you know, they tend to try to do it. So right now in this election cycle, it makes me wonder, do we stand the greatest chance right now for the next 12 months to ensure that whoever is the next state's attorney in Lake County is going to do more to reduce the garbage that going on in the criminal justice system? It just makes me wonder. And that's why I don't want to lose this opportunity in this election cycle, because we know how powerful this moment is. There's a lot of people that don't understand, why should I vote for the state's attorney? All he does is lock people up. But it's more to that office than just that. We don't deal with the trauma that comes from individuals who are put in the back seats of those cars, who's taken in those jail cells, who's talked to like they're nothing but scum. They're traumatized. And even when they may get out of jail at that moment, what effect does that have on them when they go home and beat up their kids because you don't even know what you just did to that person? One of the individuals that has taught me quite a bit about trauma is Yvonda Fulton. She has this this company of hers, Yvonda Lynn Consulting. Well, she's an expert in that field. So in learning from her, it tells me that some of the things that I've even been through, I understand it better now. And if it don't be for me grabbing a hold to a subject like this, criminal justice reform, and I have so much built up in me right now, who knows where it would go. And we have to find a way to get through to not only the individuals in the streets, the young people, the people who we call gang members that nobody wants to pay attention to. They're real. They real at voting time. You know, people don't have a problem with getting their votes. They're real. And we have to find a way to realize that once a person has even done their time, not to ramble, their time never is over with. I'm to this day, I get pulled over and people run my name and they come up with something from 1994. It's 2020. I can't go and get an apartment without somebody telling me, I know about what you did. I didn't do nothing, but the paper said I did it. You know what I mean? So this stuff is real, and it has a devastating effect on men, especially. They're the ones that dominate the penal system. So I don't want to ramble, but this is passion that you see from me. This is passion that you hear from me is real. It affected my life. It affected my daughter's life, my family's life. Juan, I mean, come on. Come on. At least with me, I received a 37-year sentence, which meant I had 18 and a half years to do. I knew 18 years, 5 months, I was going to go home. They were trying to put him up under the penitentiary. He wasn't supposed to never go home. Like, what does that do to a person when you just think all is lost, if you're that kind of person? So I just hope that we can work together and we can have Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, lawyer, defense lawyer, prosecutor. I mean, we all are part of the same community, so we say. And an organization like Ant Mound Foundation, we're here to help the community. And I am tired of the nonprofit organizations gangbanging. We need to work together. We need to work together. And Ant Mound Foundation is nonpartisan. We're not here as an organization to support no candidate, no party, none of that. We're here to just speak to the issue. And the issue here right now is criminal justice reform. I'll stop talking because I could talk forever. But Jasmine, I appreciate you coming on board and taking on the role that you've taken on. It'll make my job easier. Now I can go out and do some other things. The board for Ant Mound Foundation, all of you, to include Jed, who sits there, hopefully now we will work together more to accomplish all of those things that is in our mission statement. And I appreciate everybody for coming on. I want to tell Zaki from Black Lives Matter, he sent me a message. He was trying to get here. However, because of the shooting that we've been talking about, he's with the family of the victim and he couldn't make it. So I appreciate him for even in the midst of what he's doing. And trust me, I'm working with it as well. So I know how difficult that can be. But he would have been here. So I appreciate the fact that he called in. And I thank everybody for participating.
Thank you so much for putting this on, Jasmine. You did a great job. I really thank you to all my co-panelists, and everybody for your input.
Thank you so much. If nobody has anything else, it is 8:56, a little bit past our time, but I definitely, Larnell, did you have something to say?
I was just going to say thank you, and thanks to Anthony and everybody else that's on the panel. And one quick thing that I wanted to say, we're talking about community and everything. I think one problem that we have in the police world, especially in the Waukegan Police Department, is that we don't have officers from the community. And when you bring officers that aren't from the community into the community, that have no vested interest in the community, it presents a big problem. And so I think one major thing that we need to do is come up with a solution as to getting people in the community as police officers, either from the community or when they're hired on the police department, to get them have a vested interest within the community. And I don't think it's a difficult problem. As Anthony was saying, I've gotten to the point rather, where I'm tired of hearing that we can't do, because to me, that's a cop-out. It's time to do and get way past we can't do. So again, I just thank you guys, and I look forward to opportunities like this.
Thank you so much. All right, with that being said, I'm going to bid you all a farewell. Thank you so much for coming on and being a part of our panel for the Criminal Justice Reform Forum. This will not be the last, so we will be back be back about action and figuring out where we are with putting some of these things that we've discussed here today into play. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.